You don't have to be falling apart for your mind to already be working against you. The quietest storms are the ones nobody else can see. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is sitting in a room full of people and feeling completely, utterly alone inside their own skull. They're nodding at the right moments, laughing when it seems appropriate, and carrying on as if everything is perfectly fine. While internally, a fog of thoughts, old arguments, unresolved fears, and half-finished sentences loops endlessly on repeat. Maybe that person is you. Maybe it has been you for longer than you care to admit. Here's the thing nobody tells you growing up. The world arms you with ambition but leaves your mind completely unguarded. You're taught how to study, how to compete, how to build a career and chase a vision. But you're never taught the most essential skill of all: how to think clearly when the noise becomes deafening. How to stay grounded when your own thoughts are the loudest thing in the room. And if you've never been taught to manage your inner world, you don't just struggle, you suffer without knowing why. The ancient Stoics understood something that modern life keeps trying to bury under productivity apps and motivational content. They understood that the most dangerous battlefield any human being will ever face is not outside in the world. It's inside the mind. Your thoughts, left unexamined, become invisible chains. But the moment you begin to understand them, truly understand them, they transform from chains into tools. What if the clarity you've been searching for was never something you needed to go out and find? What if it's already inside you, buried beneath layers of noise, reaction, and accumulated mental habit? That's exactly what we're going to uncover today. Not a quick fix, not a motivational spike that fades by tomorrow morning. A real, working framework for quieting the internal chaos, sharpening your focus, and rebuilding your relationship with your own mind. The Stoic way. Stay with me, because what comes next might be the shift your mind has been waiting for. If this kind of content speaks to you, if you're on the path of building inner strength and learning to think with genuine clarity, consider subscribing to Stoic Horizon, because the mind you cultivate today quietly determines the life you live tomorrow. Here's a belief that most people carry silently and never once question: that every thought appearing in their mind must be significant, must be true, must deserve their full attention and emotional energy. It doesn't. Your mind is not a judge, and your thoughts are not evidence. They are echoes. They are fragments of old experiences, borrowed fears, replayed memories, and patterns built up over years of living inside a complicated world. They sound like you because they've been shaped by everything you've been through. They use your voice, your vocabulary, your specific worries. But that doesn't make them accurate. It doesn't make them you. Think about that for a moment. You are not the thought. You are the one who notices the thought. You are the quiet observer behind the noise, the awareness that watches the storm without being the storm itself. And the second you genuinely grasp that, even just for a fleeting moment, something fundamental shifts inside you. You stop being dragged underwater by every passing current of worry. You stop treating each anxious thought as if it were a prophecy about your future. You discover something the Stoics called the gap, the space between what happens and how you respond to it. Inside that gap lives something most people never realize they have: the power of choice. You can choose not to follow a thought down its familiar, painful spiral. You can choose to pause before reacting. You can choose not to let someone else's harsh words become the story you tell yourself about your own worth. These aren't small choices. They are the choices that determine whether you simply survive your inner world or actually learn to live with intention inside it. Your thoughts are the weather. You are the sky, always wider than whatever passes through. When you stop confusing your thoughts for your identity, the entire dynamic of your mental life shifts. Instead of absorbing every emotion as truth, you begin to observe it as information. Instead of fighting the noise, you begin to understand it. And that understanding, not control, not suppression, not forced positivity, is what gradually turns the volume down. How many people spend years trying to fix something in themselves, never realizing that what's actually broken is just the belief that their thoughts are facts. I'm not capable enough. Nobody truly cares about me. This is just who I am. These aren't truths engraved in stone. They're phrases repeated so many thousands of times that they began to feel solid. But feelings are not facts. A thought you've had 10,000 times is still just a thought. You are not the anxiety that rises in a crowded room. You are not the memory that finds you in silence. You are the one who notices both. And in that noticing, you hold more power than you know. Carl Jung wrote something that has helped countless people reframe their entire relationship to the past. That we are not what happened to us. We are what we choose to become. That single idea carries enormous weight, because it means the thoughts that rise from your old wounds don't get to write your next chapter. They can drift through your awareness like clouds crossing open sky, if you allow them to pass without chasing them, without arguing with them, without fearing them. To do that, you have to practice something that feels deeply counterintuitive at first. You have to learn to watch your mind the way a patient gardener watches a plot of land. Some things grow without permission, weeds of habit, inherited beliefs, patterns you never consciously chose. But once you see them clearly, you get to decide whether they belong. Clarity isn't the absence of thought. It's the steady recognition that not every thought deserves your energy. Peace isn't a silent mind. It's the earned discipline to stop feeding every impulse that demands your attention. And that discipline grows one moment of awareness at a time. At first, the internal noise may actually get louder when you stop engaging with it. That's not failure. That's withdrawal from a habit your mind has rehearsed for years. But with patience, something quieter returns. Not an empty silence, but a full one. Rich with the presence of the real you. Not the version shaped by every passing mood or self-doubt, but the version that remains when the storm has moved through. And the more you return to that version, the less you live on autopilot. You start catching yourself mid-reaction. You begin choosing responses instead of simply having reflexes. Clarity doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from thinking less and noticing more. It comes from widening the space between who you are and what your mind is momentarily telling you. That space, that small but powerful gap, is where your energy stops leaking and starts building. So the next time your mind hands you a painful story, pause and ask one honest question. Is this who I am? Or is this just something I've heard so often I started accepting it as true? Most of the time, the honest answer is, it's just noise. And now, you're learning to hear it without becoming it. Awareness doesn't announce itself with a dramatic breakthrough. It begins in the most ordinary moment. The moment you catch yourself thinking a thought you've thought 1,000 times before, and for the first time, you simply notice it. You don't chase it. You don't argue with it. You don't spiral into its implications. You just watch it arrive, the way you might watch a car pass on a street outside your window. That pause, that small, odd, unglamorous pause, is where everything begins to change. In that moment, you transition from participant to witness. You step out of the mental noise and into the space beside it. And from that vantage point, something that once felt overwhelming begins to look different. Not less real, but less inevitable, less automatic, less in charge. The more you practice this kind of witnessing, sitting with your mind rather than fleeing from it, fixing it, or fighting it, the more you begin to understand it. Not as a monster generating chaos on purpose, but as a messenger trying to communicate in the only language it knows. Repetition, urgency, and old emotional patterns. Thoughts that used to knock you sideways begin to land differently. You're no longer inside them. You're beside them. Watching, learning, noticing the triggers, the timing, the tone. You start recognizing the patterns. Certain doubts that only surface when you're exhausted. Certain fears that specifically arrive when you feel uncertain about your direction. Certain voices that belong to old chapters of your life that you've been carrying forward long past their expiration date. And once you see the pattern clearly, you realize it was never a fact about you. It was a groove worn into your thinking by sheer repetition. The thought that always tells you you're behind. The voice that insists you're not measuring up. They aren't truths. They're echoes bouncing off old walls, and echoes only survive if you keep creating the conditions for them to bounce. But you don't have to. Awareness gives you the power to stop responding, to let the echo ring and dissolve into silence on its own. This is where many people get stuck. They assume the goal of mental clarity is to silence the mind, to erase difficult thoughts entirely, to achieve some state of perfect stillness. But the mind doesn't work through erasure. It works through illumination. What you bring fully into the light of your attention, without running, without judging, loses the power it once held in shadow. You don't need to silence the mind. You need to stop mistaking its noise for the truth. When you're unaware, imagined threats feel completely real. Your body tenses, your breath shortens. You react to a thought as if it were a physical danger, because your nervous system doesn't know the difference. But when you're aware, you can interrupt that cycle. You trace the tension back to its source. You recognize this isn't a new emergency. It's an old pattern in new clothing. And once you see the pattern, you're no longer inside it. You're standing slightly above it. There is genuine freedom in realizing that you don't have to believe every thought that crosses your mind, no matter how familiar it feels, no matter how insistently it repeats itself. Sometimes it will still pull you under. Some memories will catch you off guard. Some fears will arrive and demand immediate attention. But even then, even in those moments, you can return afterward and ask, what was really happening in me just then? That question, asked without judgment, is itself an act of awareness. And with enough of those questions, the tangled internal architecture begins to loosen. Epictetus reminded us that it's not what happens to us, but how we respond to it, that shapes the quality of our experience. That response, that small but sacred space between stimulus and reaction, is precisely what awareness opens up. It doesn't eliminate the pain. It doesn't promise perfect peace, but it gives you something more valuable than peace. It gives you agency. And over time, each small act of awareness adds up. The fog that once felt permanent begins to lift, not all at once, but in patches of increasing clarity. So, if you've been living inside your own head and finding it an exhausting, confusing place to be, start not with control, not with resistance, but with simple attention. Just watch. Just notice. Let your awareness do the quiet, powerful work that no amount of effort or willpower ever could. There is a particular kind of thought that never announces itself loudly. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It settles quietly at the back of your awareness, unnamed, unexamined, but always there. You feel it as a heaviness in your chest before you can identify it as a specific thought. It surfaces when the environment goes quiet, when something small unexpectedly triggers something large. These thoughts don't persist because they're too powerful to face. They persist because they've never once been brought into the light. They've never been written down, never spoken aloud, never acknowledged as real. And so they grow, not in number, but in weight. They grow heavy in the silence you've built around them. We carry the unspoken the way we carry physical weight, distributed across the body, showing up in chronic tension, in sudden flashes of exhaustion, in the way we react disproportionately to things that shouldn't matter. You tell yourself you're simply tired, but what you may actually be is full, carrying things that need to be set down somewhere. The silent inventory might include grief you never fully processed, anger you convinced yourself wasn't valid, fear you gave no name to because naming it felt like admitting something you weren't ready to admit. Your body holds all of it with remarkable faithfulness. Your nervous system remembers what your conscious mind tries to bypass. Your focus fragments because part of your energy is permanently dedicated to guarding a door you're afraid to open. Real mental clarity, lasting clarity, requires more than redirecting attention. It requires honesty, not public performance, not dramatic confession, but private, unflinching honesty with yourself. There is something deeply transformative about finally putting the unsaid into words. Even imperfect words, even incomplete ones. whispering something true to yourself in the quiet of your car, writing a messy, unfinished sentence in a journal. These aren't small acts. They're the beginning of reclamation. What you name loses its power to control you from the shadows. What you bring into the light cannot haunt you the same way. It's peculiar how often we fear our own truth more intensely than we fear the judgment of others. We keep parts of ourselves hidden even from our own awareness, as if not saying a thing makes it less true. But silence doesn't protect you. It only delays healing. And healing doesn't arrive by avoiding the weather of your inner life. It arrives by walking through it with your eyes fully open. The Stoics did not flinch from discomfort. They moved toward it with intention. Marcus Aurelius wrote that if something is endurable, you endure it. But the deeper meaning was never about suppression. It was about confrontation, about refusing to let what you won't acknowledge secretly govern you. Everything you refuse to face owns a piece of your attention, and you deserve to be whole. Sometimes the most healing act isn't to analyze the thought, but simply to let it speak. Give it room. Write it down even when the words feel wrong, even when the emotion is bigger than the sentence. Writing isn't merely expression, it is excavation. You dig beneath the surface noise and uncover what has quietly been directing your moods, your reactions, the particular distance you keep from people you care about. And once it's out, even partially, something in you breathes more freely. Other times, the release comes through another person. A single sentence shared with someone you genuinely trust can dissolve years of internal pressure. Not because they solve it for you, but because the act of speaking it aloud proves that it no longer has to stay hidden. There is a specific, remarkable weight that lifts when you hear your own voice give sound to what your heart has been silently holding. It doesn't need to be eloquent. It doesn't need to be fully formed. It just needs to be real. Because the moment your truth becomes audible, it forfeits its ability to quietly diminish you. And even if speaking it to someone else feels like too much, even then, you can face it. A single honest breath, where you acknowledge what you're actually feeling without immediately constructing a story around it, is already movement. The body holds grief, anger, and guilt, not as abstract mental concepts, but as physical states. In the breath, in the shoulders, in the stomach. When you allow space for these things to surface and move through rather than remain stored, the lightness that follows isn't because they've vanished. It's because you're no longer alone with them. You've finally met them. You've listened. Aristotle believed that knowing yourself is the foundation of all wisdom, but that knowing is not purely intellectual. It's emotional, physical, earned through willingness to sit with the parts of yourself you once fled from. When you stop pretending certain things aren't there, you discover they were never as overwhelming as you feared. They were simply waiting for you to stop running. Unspoken pain isolates. It whispers to you that your struggle is uniquely shameful, uniquely heavy, uniquely yours alone. But once you bring even one piece of it into the light, you realize the landscape of human experience is full of people carrying their own silent weight, and that your honesty connects you to that landscape rather than separating you from it. There is nothing fragile about having something to say and not yet knowing how. The weight only multiplies when you convince yourself it must stay hidden forever. You are allowed to speak. You are allowed to write. You are allowed to let the thoughts that never found a voice finally surface and be heard. Because until they do, they will continue pulling your focus, dulling your perception, muting your clarity. But once they're out, even imperfectly, they lose their rigid shape. What once felt like a solid wall becomes a doorway. What once felt like a storm becomes a cloud you can watch moving through. There is a specific kind of ache that doesn't fade simply with time. It is the ache of a moment that ended long ago but continues to live inside your mind, as if it is still occurring. You find yourself replaying a conversation that cannot be changed, revisiting a decision that has already been made, reliving a loss that has already happened. Not because it needs your attention, but because part of you is still trying, somehow, to get a different outcome. You keep returning to closed doors as if this time, somehow, you'll find them open. But the past doesn't change. Only your relationship to it can. This is the particular cruelty of rumination. We reopen old wounds expecting to find something useful inside them, understanding, perhaps, or the peace that eluded us at the time. But what we usually find instead is erosion. Every time we relive a painful moment in full detail, we pull the wound open again. And we leave carrying less energy, less clarity, less capacity for the present moment than when we started. The moment has already happened. The words were already spoken. The silence already fell in that room. What remains in your mind is not the event itself. It is the echo of the event. And echoes, as vivid as they feel, cannot actually harm you. Not unless you mistake them for the present. Not unless you keep living in direct response to a sound that no longer has a source. The mind can hold only so much at once. When you keep a significant portion of your attention anchored in the past, you have correspondingly less available for what is right in front of you. You cannot build clarity in a mind crowded with ghosts. The irony is profound. Most of what we fixate on with such intensity is, by definition, unchangeable. And yet it consumes us. It makes the present blurry. It makes the future feel inaccessible. You're not stuck because of what happened. You're stuck because you haven't yet decided to stop letting what happened define the shape of today. Releasing the past is not the same as pretending it didn't matter. It is not amnesia. It is not denial. It means you have made a decision, a genuinely courageous decision, to stop mining a finished chapter for meaning it is no longer capable of providing. It means you allow a wound to close. No, says not because the injury wasn't deep, but because you have decided you deserve to stop bleeding from it. Epictetus observed that people are disturbed not by what happens to them, but by the perspective they choose to hold about what happened. It is not the event itself that continues the suffering. It is how tightly you hold the grip on the memory of it. Sometimes we hold on because we believe it serves a protective function. We think that if we remember the pain vividly enough, we won't repeat the mistake. But that's not how protection works. Awareness protects you. Memory alone, vivid, repetitive, emotionally raw, doesn't teach you. It just punishes you. You don't need to carry the full weight of yesterday in order to carry the wisdom of it forward. Forgiveness, and this applies especially to forgiving yourself, is not weakness. It is not a soft option or a comfortable shortcut. It is one of the most rigorous disciplines a person can undertake. It takes real strength to say, I operated from the knowledge and capacity I had at the time, and now I am choosing to move forward from where I currently stand. Forgiving others, the ones who caused real damage, who may never understand what they did or never change, is not about their worthiness. Some people will not earn it. Some people won't change, but if you continue carrying their actions like stones in every pocket, they retain influence over you long after the relationship has ended. Forgiveness is not a gift you extend to someone else. It is the decision to stop letting someone else's actions set the terms of your inner life. It is how you reclaim the energy that has been silently flowing toward an old grievance. It is how you make room to hear your own voice again. The voice that has been buried beneath the weight of what was said, what was done, what was lost. True release is not avoidance. It is confrontation without attachment. It means looking directly at the memory, honoring what it cost you, and then deciding not to surrender another moment of your life to it. It means stepping out of the loop that tells you further rumination will eventually yield new insight. It won't. What it will yield is fatigue, disconnection, and the quiet tragedy of missing the life that is attempting to unfold right now, while you're looking somewhere else. You are allowed to ask yourself honestly, how much longer am I willing to let yesterday erode today? How much longer will I keep trading present peace for past pain that cannot be changed? Letting go doesn't erase what happened. It rewrites your relationship to it. It means that when you look back, you feel something different. Not because the past has changed, but because you have. And in that interior shift, your focus returns. your energy returns. The life you've been half present for begins to come into sharper relief. It doesn't always arrive as a grand moment of release. Often, it's quieter than that. A memory surfaces, and instead of following it all the way down, you simply breathe and let it pass. The story you've told 100 times over loses a little of its grip. You begin speaking about the past differently, with more distance, more perspective, more gentleness toward the version of yourself who lived it. And one day, without quite being able to say exactly when it happened, you notice the weight is no longer there, not forgotten, not erased, but no longer in charge. Let the echo fade. Come back to what's here, the breath, the stillness, the open horizon of this present moment. Clear, focused, free. There is a voice that follows you everywhere. It doesn't come from outside. It comes from within, which is precisely what makes it so difficult to identify and so easy to obey. It speaks in your vocabulary. It knows your specific insecurities. It says things like, "You're behind where you should be. You haven't done enough. You will disappoint people again." And beneath its apparent urgency, beneath its relentless productivity-shaped concern, there is something else entirely. Fear. The inner critic isn't your conscience. It isn't your compass. It's fear wearing the costume of high standards. This voice wasn't born in you. It was built, assembled over years from the accumulated pressure of comparison, perfectionism, and the expectations of people and systems that measured your worth by your output. School systems that graded everything, social environments that rewarded performance, family dynamics that connected love to achievement, the digital world that makes everyone's highlight reel available for constant comparison. Over time, the voice became automatic, so thoroughly woven into your inner monologue that you stopped questioning it and simply accepted it as accurate. It shaped decisions. It made you smaller. It convinced you to delay and hesitate and doubt, and then criticized you for the very delays and hesitations it helped create. But here is what you need to understand. This voice is not you. It is a script. It was written by external forces operating without your conscious permission, and it can be rewritten, not by arguing with it, not by trying to overpower it with louder positive declarations, but by systematically starving it of the one thing it requires to stay powerful: your compliance. You don't silence the inner critic by winning an argument with it. You silence it by showing up anyway, by creating the evidence it can't refute. You don't wait for the voice to go quiet before you begin. You begin with it present. You take one step in the direction it insists is too risky, too ambitious, too likely to end in disappointment. You show up on the days when everything feels uncertain and imperfect and unfinished, and in doing so, you accumulate evidence. Real, lived, undeniable proof that the voice is not telling you the complete story. Because perfectionism, the currency the inner critic trades in, is not a standard of excellence. It is a mechanism for paralysis. The moment you accept that progress matters more than flawlessness, you begin to starve the voice of its leverage. It needs you frozen. The moment you move, even imperfectly, even clumsily, it starts to lose its authority over you. And gradually, not all at once, but genuinely and cumulatively, your focus shifts. You begin listening less to the voice rooted in old fear and more to the voice emerging from actual experience. That newer voice isn't perfect either. It may still hesitate at times, but it feels fundamentally different. It feels like clarity. It feels like finally having your own back. Carl Jung wrote that the most terrifying act is to fully accept oneself. Not just the impressive parts, but the flawed, unfinished, uncertain parts as well. And perhaps that's the exact reason the inner critic exists, to prevent that total self-acceptance. Because the moment you accept all of yourself, the capable and the struggling, the confident and the doubtful, the critic loses its leverage entirely. There is nothing left to threaten you with. The critic will still return. It will arrive when you're depleted, when you stumble, when a bad day follows a good one. It will say, "See, nothing really changed, but you'll know better." You'll know that one difficult day doesn't erase the steps you've taken. You'll know that failure informs rather than defines. And in that knowing there is a specific kind of peace, not the peace of everything going well, but the peace of trusting yourself through whatever comes. You owe the inner critic no explanation. You owe it no performance. You don't need to justify your pace, your method, your path to anyone, especially not to the version of yourself that was assembled from fear. What matters is how you show up now. What matters is that you keep choosing to try, to learn, to remain curious and engaged, especially on the days it would be easier not to. Because every time you do that, you prove something quietly but powerfully, that you are not the voice inside your head. You are the one who decides what to do despite it. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, that we are more often frightened than actually harmed. And that is precisely what the inner critic does best. It generates imagined catastrophes and presents them as calculated predictions. But once you see that, once you genuinely recognize how much of the pain you've carried was constructed from stories rather than reality, you begin to reclaim territory, the territory of your own day, your own choices, your own story. The goal was never to erase the critic. The goal is to stop feeding it your belief, to let your actions grow louder than its narrative, day after day, until the noise becomes background static you no longer tune into. You could be in the most genuinely peaceful external environment imaginable. No traffic, no deadlines, no obligations, no devices, and still find your inner world completely unable to settle. Because stillness was never about your surroundings. It was always about what happens inside you when the surroundings go quiet. And that is a far more demanding achievement than simply finding a peaceful location. The quieter the room becomes, the louder the unattended mind gets. This is not a flaw. It's information. Most people spend their lives in pursuit of external peace, sincerely believing that if the circumstances were finally right, if they had fewer responsibilities, a better job, a different relationship, a different city, the internal noise would settle. It won't. The noise follows you because it isn't generated by circumstances. It's generated by unexamined patterns inside your own mind. Real stillness isn't accidental. It isn't something that arrives once the conditions are favorable. It is something you practice, deliberately and regularly. Even when, especially when, the conditions feel far from ideal. It doesn't emerge when everything is finally sorted out. It emerges when you stop needing everything to be sorted out before you allow yourself to be present. We live inside a culture that has made busyness into a virtue. We've been shaped by systems and environments that equate constant movement with productivity, value, and relevance. So when we stop, when we sit without a task, without stimulation, without an agenda, we feel it immediately. The discomfort of having nothing to demonstrate, nothing to optimize, nothing to achieve. We feel like we're falling behind. But what if sitting in genuine stillness, not laziness, not avoidance, but active, rooted, intentional presence, is itself one of the most demanding and valuable things a person can do? In stillness, you don't escape your mind. You finally meet it without the noise of distraction separating you from it. The moment you sit in silence, the mind will attempt to fill every millimeter of the space. Old memories will surface. Tasks left undone will assert their urgency. Fears you've been outrunning will arrive at the edges of your awareness. Let them. The practice is not about preventing the content from arising. It's about learning to be with it without being consumed by it. Sitting with what shows up and listening without judgment or defense. This is the kind of stillness that builds strength from the inside rather than adding pressure from the outside. It is the practice of learning that you can be in the presence of your own discomfort without requiring it to immediately resolve. Seneca wrote that true happiness involves embracing the present without anxious grasping toward the future. And it is precisely in stillness that the meaning of that becomes experiential rather than intellectual. When you are genuinely still, the future releases its grip. You stop trying to live 3 weeks ahead. You stop replaying last month. And you begin, perhaps for the first time in a long while, to experience the actual moment you occupy. This breath, this sensation, this specific quality of being alive right now, without needing it to be anything other than what it is. It takes practice. You return to it daily, not as an obligation, not as another item on the performance checklist, but as a genuine act of care for yourself. 5 minutes with no music, no content, no stimulation, just breath, just presence, and just the quiet company of your own awareness. In that small window, your nervous system begins to settle. Your thinking slows and begins to clarify. You start perceiving things that stress had rendered invisible. The quality of your own breathing, the texture of the silence, the small and real evidence that you are not the emergency your mind sometimes insists you are. Over time, that clarity doesn't stay contained to those 5 minutes. It begins seeping into everything. Your conversations, your decisions, your relationships. You become less reflexive, more considered, more genuinely present. Stillness becomes a compass rather than a destination, a quiet internal reference point that reminds you, you are not your impulses. You don't have to answer every thought. You don't have to treat every moment as something to be optimized or resolved. Jung believed that silence offers profound assistance to those in the process of discovering something true about their own inner life. And that is what stillness truly is. Not an absence of activity, but a mirror. A chance to see yourself without the distortion of constant stimulation. What you find in that reflection isn't always comfortable, but it is real. And from real self-knowledge, genuine growth becomes possible. Most people never give themselves that chance. Every quiet moment gets filled. Every gap gets covered. Not because they're busy, but because they're afraid. Afraid of what the silence might reveal, afraid of the questions that might rise when the distractions fall away. But those very things they're afraid of are exactly what's quietly governing them in the background. Stillness isn't peaceful because it's comfortable. It's powerful because it's honest. When you've sat in stillness and genuinely faced your own mind, the external world holds less power over you. You become less desperate for constant stimulation, less pulled by every perceived emergency, less shaken by uncertainty, because you've already stood in the center of your own internal storm and discovered that you can breathe there. You've built something solid and interior, something no external circumstance can take from you once it exists. The knowledge that you can be with yourself. So give yourself that time, not eventually, not when the schedule finally clears. Now, a few moments in a quiet corner, a slow, honest breath. So, let the thoughts rise without following them. Let the body release what it's been holding. Let the mind settle, not through force, not through effort, but through the patient practice of presence. In that space, you won't just find peace. You'll find yourself, not the version assembled by pressure and performance, but the one that has always been quietly there, waiting to be heard, waiting to be trusted, waiting to lead you forward with clarity rather than noise. Stillness is not a luxury. In a world that never stops moving, it is how you remember who you actually are. And from that remembering, you begin to live, not in reaction, not in anxiety, not in the deafening echo of old fear, but in alignment with something genuine, something steady, something entirely your own. Your mind doesn't passively record your experience. It actively builds your reality from it, and the construction material it uses most relentlessly, more than logic, more than reason, more than intention, is attention. Whatever you consistently direct your focus toward, your mind begins to architect itself around. It doesn't evaluate whether what you're focusing on is useful or harmful. It simply adapts, reinforces, and specializes. Attention is not just something you use, it's the raw material your inner world is made of. This is why mental clarity doesn't come primarily from thinking harder. reasoning more carefully, or applying more willpower. It comes from consistently looking in the right direction. If your attention is perpetually trained on what's damaged, what's absent, what has failed or might fail, your mind becomes extraordinarily skilled at locating more of it. Not because more failure exists than success, but because that's what it has been optimized to find. The brain builds its pathways through repetition. Focus, applied consistently, becomes habit. Habit, sustained over time, becomes the lens through which every new experience gets interpreted. That's why two people can move through nearly identical circumstances and arrive at completely opposite internal states. One person's attention is cultivated toward evidence of resilience. The other's is locked on evidence of threat. Your inner world isn't shaped by what happens to you. It's shaped by where you consistently choose to look. This isn't about manufacturing false optimism. It isn't about plastering cheerful language over genuine difficulty. It's about something more precise and more demanding, the practice of directing attention with intention toward what is actually present alongside the difficulty, toward what is healing, what is working, toward the small and often overlooked moments of meaning that exist even inside hard seasons. When you begin redirecting attention, even slightly, even gradually, your mind starts building new pathways. You begin noticing things you previously overlooked. A sense of ease in your own body, the specific quality of a small success, a moment of genuine connection. These weren't absent before. They were simply outside the frame of what your attention was trained to capture. Redirect the frame, and the picture changes. You don't have to force positivity. You don't have to fight the negative. You only need to redirect, slowly, gently, persistently, toward what also deserves your attention. There is a difference between toxic positivity, which demands that you pretend difficulties don't exist, and conscious attention redirection, which acknowledges difficulty and then deliberately includes evidence of something else alongside it. One is avoidance disguised as optimism. The other is a genuine practice of cognitive expansion, a widening of the lens so that the full landscape of your reality becomes visible, not just the parts that confirm your fears. Practice it daily, not for hours, not with elaborate rituals, but for a few intentional minutes. Let your attention rest on what is present, what is working, what is quietly good even within something difficult. Over time, the accumulation of those minutes reshapes the architecture of how you think. New roads open. Old defaults begin to loosen. The habitual interpretation shifts, incrementally, but genuinely. Attention is energy. Where you direct it, your life begins to move. Not metaphorically, practically, measurably, in the actual decisions you make and the actual opportunities you notice, and the actual version of yourself you gradually become. You don't need all the answers before you begin. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need the voice in your head to stop before you take the next step. You just need the honesty to start exactly where you are. In the fog, in the uncertainty, in the middle of the unfinished work of becoming yourself. Because clarity isn't something you wait for in a clear field on a perfect day. It is something you earn by moving through the fog with your eyes as open as you can keep them. It is something that accumulates through small, consistent acts of attention, honesty, awareness, and willingness. This is where everything you've heard today converges. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that watches them. You have the power to stop letting the past govern the present. You have the ability to face what's been unspoken and give it form. You can learn to observe the inner critic without obeying it. You can build a practice of stillness that provides the clarity chaos cannot. And you can train your attention to build the inner world you actually want to inhabit. None of this happens overnight. None of it arrives complete. But the journey begins, as all meaningful journeys do, with a single, honest, courageous step, taken exactly where you are. Let this be the moment you stop waiting for something to change and choose to begin changing from the inside. If this resonated with you, if something in today's exploration landed in a place that feels true, consider giving this video a like. It genuinely helps Stoic Horizon reach more people who are walking the same path. And if you haven't already, subscribe. Because clarity is not a destination we arrive at once. It's a practice we return to again and again, every single day. There is another video waiting for you right now that will take this deeper still. Your next step is already prepared. Thank you, sincerely, for being here. For choosing to show up for your own mind. That matters more than you know.